I was all right for a while. I could smile for a while. But I saw you last night. You held my hand so tight as you stopped to say hello. Oh, you wish me well. You couldn't tell that I've been crying over you.
Yes, welcome to The Nose. It's the end of the week. It's time for our cultural roundtable. The first topic, apropos of Mr. Orbison there, is going to be crying. I think the crying that we see on stage and on screen, and also the crying that we do in the audience. Before we get to that, excuse me. But before we begin talking about that, I want to tell you what else is going to happen later in the show. Well, Sunday's the Super Bowl. And the halftime show is going to be, for the first time ever, all centered on hip-hop, as opposed to using hip-hop splashed in as a spice. We're not talking about that. We're also not talking about, although Irene Papoulis did pressure us to do this, the use of the Bengals safeties in countering the Rams jet motion offense. We're instead going to talk about the commercials. We've already seen a whole bunch of the commercials. You can see a whole bunch of the commercials. We'll talk about those. And then our last topic on the show today will be Somebody Somewhere, set in Manhattan, Kansas. It brings together some performers better known for their work south of 23rd Street in the other Manhattan, but playing much more subdued roles in a dramedy, which will either praise or not praise depending on who's talking. So now that I've set all that up and bumbled my way through it, our guest today, our panel, are Sam Hadelman, who works in music public relations and hosts the Sam Hadelman Show at Radio Free Brooklyn. Rich Hollant is principal at CoLab, founder of Free Center and commissioner on cultural affairs for the city of Hartford. Irene Papoulis teaches writing at Trinity College. And yes, we are going to begin by talking about crying. This is occasioned by a piece by the New York Times' superb critic at large, Wesley Morris, who meditated on what he called the power of a good cry. Tears are central to great acting. A lifetime of weeping at the movies has taught me how much letting it all go in real life can matter too. So we all were kind of sharing about this, but Rich, maybe you can kind of get us going here. You summoned up immediately a memory of crying at the movies.
Oh my goodness, I have so many memories of crying at the movies. One that actually really resonated with me, and it might be different than the one I shared earlier because it'll change every couple of minutes. It was that scene when Sam, played by this dog, this German Shepherd, Abby, was strangled by Will Smith's character, Dr. Robert Neville, if I recall correctly, in I Am Legend. Those were about the best tears that I've ever seen in a movie, in a performer on the movie, in a movie. The stillness of Will in that scene just set up the entire rest of the movie and what was going to go on there. Beautifully played, hit straight in the heartstrings, right?
Yeah, and I think dogs are sort of cheating, right? I mean, you put a dog in there, I mean, people are going to cry. The actor's going to cry, the audience is going to cry.
Exactly. But then there was this other point. The other scene, the other experience I've had with crying in the theater was the audience crying. And I have two examples of that are just so incredibly, different. The first one is, what I would expect, right? We were watching Dancer in the Dark, and there was nobody in the theater at that point other than me and two other friends of mine were sitting in the theater. And by the time the lights went up, we looked at each other and we were just this gooey mess of tears and all kinds of biofluid, just upset and thrown and unable to speak beyond that moment. The other time that resonates with me was going to see on opening day Purple Rain. And there was this point where Prince was crying in the movie, and the entire audience around me in Copley Square in Boston was sobbing along with him. And I could hear this woman in back of me emphatically pounding the seat, screaming out, "You cry, boy, you cry," cheering on his tears. And it was just weirdly cathartic cathartic and beautiful, and everything that crying is supposed to be about.
Yeah, so I mean, it raises some interesting questions too about why we cry. Do we want to cry? Are we fighting it off? Irene, how about you? How did you relate to Morris's piece?
Okay, well, I have a lot of. First of all, I have to say, I remember I'm not much of a crier in movies, but I have like such a vivid memory of, I saw the movie Frances with Jessica Lange about this actress named Frances Farmer who is like a free spirit, wild person, but she's like sent to the psychiatric hospital and she gets given electroshock treatment and finally gets a lobotomy. And when I saw her after she got the lobotomy, her face, I just broke out into these wrenching sobs. It was in the 80s. I was in a theater in New York City, and I was just out of control sobbing, and the person with me didn't know what to do. And the audience was kind of staring at me because it seemed like a little overwrought for the experience. But I was just like the most cathartic sobbing cry that I still remember now all these years later. So, but after that, I hardly cried in the movies at all. So I don't know. And I think, it's always interesting to find out what makes people cry.
Irene, one thing I was going to ask you too is the thing that we're going to talk about in our third and final segment today, Somebody Somewhere. The first thing we see in that is Bridget Everett, who she's working in a test grading center in the middle of Kansas, and she's reading an essay, and she starts to cry. And as that begins, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I know an actor is supposed to cry, I start to wonder, can they do it? Are they going to be able to do this? I mean, it's kind of like watching the Olympics and wondering if they're going to fall during their snowboarding routine.
That's true. And a lot of them do fall, because you don't believe it. But I did believe her. I thought she was taking a test. Anyway, we could talk about it, but I thought she was taking a test. But as a teacher, I felt especially gratified that she was crying because she was actually grading a test. So that was a different kind of crying. But but I think Wesley Morris's point that he says we Americans have rarely known what to do with shows of emotion, which is debatable, certainly. But then he sort of points to theaters as a place where we can get it out, which and then he also mentions funerals, the places that we can't cry publicly right now during the pandemic. And so I think that's a really interesting point, that we need that kind of catharsis, that sort of public arenas for crying, or I think it's like cathedrals of crying or something he calls it.
Yeah, Sam, how about you? I should say that one of the ideas that I shared with our panel was, for men, I think the older they get, the more likely, at least a lot of us, the more likely we are to be crying, particularly over things that probably shouldn't even occasion crying. But you're young and full of life. So how do you react to all this?
Having me on a panel to talk about crying feels like having Kanye West on a panel to talk about humility. But I have cried like a couple times. Like, I'm not like a frequent crier, but when I was reading the piece, I was thinking about It's a Wonderful Life. I found that movie my senior year of college, and there was like a lot of stuff going on with me, and my mom could tell. So she just like sat me down and she was like, just watch this movie with me. And I was like, this 1946 James Stewart Christmas movie? Like, you want me to watch this 3-hour movie with you? And by the end, when he's like meeting up with all his kids, sorry for the 70-year spoiler alert, when he like comes back to his world and he sees his kids and he like values his life, I cried like a small child. And now every single Christmas I watch this movie and I haven't been able to get through it without crying. But yeah, I think that crying to me feels like a snake shedding skin. Like, I don't do it a lot, but when I do, it feels like whatever's on my back is like finally off.
Ooh, that was a beautiful analogy. I like that. Yeah, I mean, I shared with the panel, I'm a pretty bad crier. I cry a lot. I cry at things that, as you get older, you'll cry at like an insurance commercial or something like that. And I've occasionally been in plays, in theaters for plays where I think my crying was actually kind of a distraction for people around me, but I couldn't really wrestle it under control. But to me, one of the real marvels is kind of Bernadette Peters is sort of famous for just even in concert settings singing some torch song, some 11 o'clock ballad, probably most notably Not a Day Goes By, and she begins to cry, and she can sing while she's crying, which strikes me as just a superhuman human kind of thing. But I guess, Rich, one of the things that we want to do, we want to interact with culture that way. We, first of all, want to see actors who can do it. And can appear to mean it. One of the things that Morris mentions is broadcast news, where William Hurt plays a guy who can make himself cry in a way that strikes us as intensely phony. But in a way, that's what acting is, right? Acting is figuring out some way to make yourself cry when you have to.
Well, yeah, but it's all about what you channel and how close to the surface your grieving, your loss, and your access to your emotions are, right? Mm-hmm. So to a certain extent, there's a technical aspect to crying, right? I think that I cry differently when I'm alone than when I'm amongst a bunch of folks. I did a performance recently where I was playing a thing about a piece of grieving that I'm going through that led me to crying on stage, and I made it through the song, mm-hmm. Which I wouldn't have made it through if I were sitting in my living room, Yeah. So I do think that there are some. I think you made an Olympic analogy earlier. I think that there is a kind of scoring to how we present our grieving, and I think that there's a kind of public allowable grieving, and there are all these rules around it, and so I think that an actor has so much that they could play with, right? Because the rules are rich and layered.
Rich, you were playing music, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So it was genuine. You weren't feigning it at all, right?
I wasn't feigning that at all.
Yeah.
But it was also predictable, right? I could predict, as I was thinking through this performance that I was going to do, that I was probably going to cry at this point, and in fact, in the rehearsals before it, I was like, you know what? If I perform this piece right now in rehearsal, it'll have less impact when I do it live, so the crying was like predictive. So the question that I have is, was it also therefore performative, right? I think these are all really oddly complex questions. And I think that for the most part, there's a suspense of disbelief that happens for me when I see someone crying across from me. I automatically believe them. I think it's real. And it immediately, like almost, like a Pavlovian thing, touches this thing in me that wants to cry too, that wants to just exercise that and to have the permission to rid myself of whatever this excess that I'm carrying is at the time.
Well, I do think that Morris goes a little bit too far. I just have to kind of speed this thing along a little bit because we're going to run out of time here. But, Irene, I do feel like Morris, he kind of, I think, overemphasizes the idea that you can't cry in public. I think that's an old idea. We all know that Ed Muskie kind of got knocked out of a presidential race for crying, and there was a female politician, her name was Patty Murray, something like that. She also cried too much in public. But I think that's over. I mean, Bob Dole was a big crier. I don't think people made a big deal out of that.
Well, he talks about Biden. You know, he thinks people scoff at him for crying, though.
Yeah, I'm just not really, I don't know. I've actually cried really profusely on the air a couple of times and thought, oh boy, I'm just going to hear so much about this. And nobody even blinked. Nobody, I just don't think that the stigma against crying is, including men crying, is quite what, at this point anyway, what Morris thinks it is. But then I live closer to Manhattan, New York than Manhattan, Kansas, so maybe I'm wrong about that. Hey, we need to kind of transition over to the Super Bowl commercials just to sort of keep things going here. So, yes, a lot of the Super Bowl ads that you're going to see on Sunday, assuming you watch the Super Bowl, are up already. They feature a lot of celebrities, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Although, Irene, you were surprised to find out that you don't have to wait for the Super Bowl to see those commercials.
Yeah, I mean, that was the big highlight for me of any Super Bowl party I've ever been to, has been like, ooh, let's watch the commercials. And, it's going to be new. And then people are going to be talking about it later. So it's very anticlimactic to be able to look at it online in advance. Why would I bother watching the Super Bowl aside from the the halftime show.
So before we talk more about this, and Kat, we're going to go to A5 here. I mean, a lot of these Super Bowl ads are pretty visual in nature. They go by fast. This one has a certain amount of dialogue. If you want to wait for the Super Bowl, then turn off the volume for 60 seconds. This is a Super Bowl ad for Amazon's Alexa. It stars a real-life married couple, Scarlett Johansson and Colin Jost, and I think that's all you need to know.
It's like she can read your mind. I love that we get to sleep in. Ordering fresh mint mouthwash. Extra strength.
I was thinking I should get a spray tan, because that's on Wednesday.
Activating blender.
Funeral's on Monday.
What about the gold, Papa? Can't you see? The treasure all along. It was here.
Love the eye patch. When does the show open?
March 8th.
Setting reminder to fake your own death on March 8th.
What the
When you have to do those love scenes with hot guys, is that fun or is that like the worst?
It's the worst. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies.
So if you can pick up the conceit there, the notion is that Scarlett and Colin are having their conversations around the house. The ad goes on a little bit from there, too. And Alexa is kind of picking up some motives or alternative versions of behavior that they are harboring. It's like Alexa can read their minds. And I think, Sam, you and I had a similar reaction to this, which was really just, do the Alexa people want to kind of hype that particular thing about Alexa?
I just thought it was creepy. Like, I was like, oh, what's the name of that company in Terminator that ends up killing everybody? Like, those were the vibes I got from that commercial.
Skynet? I don't know.
Yeah, Skynet. Skynet's giving me, Amazon's giving me some real Skynet vibes. But it's just like funny to see how Super Bowl commercials, like, there's always like a theme for like a couple years. It was like, let's be as random and wacky as possible. And now it's like, let's make obscure pop culture references that we know people are going to tweet about. And let's get Colin Jost and Scarlett Johansson and Pete Davidson. I don't know. I don't buy any of that stuff. I've never really cared about commercials like that. I understand why people, if you don't love football and you love pizza and you want to go to a Super Bowl party, like, have fun, watch your commercials. But I'm here for Joe Burrow.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just to be clear for people who kind of don't get this. So one of the things about the Alexa device is that if you say something, even if you don't say it directly to Alexa, Alexa is listening. Carolyn Payne, one of our regular Nose panelists, had the experience of saying something like, I like bread in front of Alexa. And before she knows it, stuff she's looking at on the internet, there are advertisements, not just for bread, but for pillows that are shaped like a loaf of bread or something. I mean, Alexa just knew that she wanted bread in some form. And so, yeah, I don't know why you would kind of double down on that. So the other thing that I was sort of remarking to everybody, Irene, was that it does seem like they just gather up celebrities like a bunch of pebbles and fling them at the product. There are some of these ads that have like 5 or 6 famous people in them. There's a Lindsay Lohan one for Planet Fitness that has Danny Trejo and William Shatner and I forget who else. But I mean, they're just sort of there to be celebrities, it seems.
Well, and they're also there to be ordinary. I mean, I was thinking about the Colin Jost and Scarlett Johansson. Like, I don't want to think about them being ordinary. I want to think about them having an amazing marriage that's really exciting. And, and so I was just struck by the lack of sexiness in the ads. It's just kind of ordinary celebrities being ordinary, doing ordinary stuff that we do, kind of, without the kind of fantasy that I would expect or want from seeing celebrities. So, yeah.
So Rich, maybe we should just pause and say, I think you were kind of just generally unimpressed with the overall quality of these commercials.
Yeah, I think that the writing was kind of poor. I mean, there are a couple that I thought stood out, but they've been standing out year over year. You can't go wrong, like you mentioned earlier, with dogs and Clydesdales, and with no dialogue. That's also a real boon. But I think that these are all fairly predictable ads. We've seen them run a bunch of times. Exactly the same kind of format format, the same kind of the same kind of intelligence is running through them. And that's okay. I mean, they're 30 seconds. We could just dive in 30 seconds to a minute. We could hang out with something that's familiar, get a little chuckle maybe, and move on. I don't really put a lot of stock in what ads are doing. Being in the business of doing marketing and ads and communications, I carry a fair amount of skepticism about what it's all about, But, the ones that stand out as really good storytelling, and making that happen in 30 seconds to 60 seconds is a real art form. And the celebrity stuff, though, as we've all been pointing out, it's overdrawn. And that there's an aspect of the celebrity stuff right now that seems to be counter to the I like Mike notion.
Yeah,
right? There's a point in which we were up to these celebrities in a way that was meritorious, and now what we're looking for is less even than their ordinariness. I would say, Irene, I think that we're looking at folks who have this sordid underbelly that's popped up in social media and everywhere else, and that's what's actually making them normal. And
you have to be in the know.
Yeah, exactly. I want to build on that in the know question. So, because I think, Sam, you had a similar reaction. I mean, one of the first commercials I watched today was one for, I guess, AT&T cable or something. I don't know. That's part of the problem too. I don't exactly know what the commercial was for. But I'm watching the commercial, and there's two women kind of on opposite sides of a stage at a high school reunion, and they're looking at each other and kind of exchanging dirty glances, and then somebody else gets picked. I don't know, the queen of the reunion or something. And if you don't know that the two women are Demi Moore and Mila Kunis, and that one of them used to be with Ashton Kutcher, who is not in this commercial, by the way, one of them used to be with Ashton Kutcher and one of them is now, and that might be why they would be exchanging these dirty looks. I mean, if you don't know all that stuff, the commercial doesn't make any sense at all. I'm not even sure if it makes any sense if you do know all that stuff. But Sam, you were sort of saying that culture moves at a kind of supersonic speed now, and you either keep up or you don't.
Yeah, pop culture is a buying culture. That's how they keep you buying stuff, going to the movies, watching TV. I don't mean to sound like I, walk around with a tinfoil hat, but we're all hogtied to it. If you want to be someone who engages in pop culture, who wants to know what the next hottest HBO show is, what the next hottest movie is, what superhero movies coming out, what commercials are running, you have to constantly be tapped in. You think I want to go on Twitter every day and see what nonsense is going on? No, I'm programmed like that pretty much at this point. So that's why, I unfortunately know who Demi Moore used to be married to and understood that commercial immediately because we're hogtied. We can't leave pop culture. It's kind of like a lifelong contract if you want to be in the game.
But, Irene, that's a very unusual approach to content. But I think it is the world we live in. I've been saying a lot on the show recently that, you have to watch 22 movies, I think it is, to fully understand Avengers Endgame. I mean, there's sort of callbacks and evocations that connect to all kinds of Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. Star Wars is no less challenging. I just made it all the way through the Book of Boba Fett, but I know there's stuff I'm not getting. And now commercials are like that too. I mean, in fact, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it's all about being in the club. If you're in the club and you know all the stuff and you know all the reference, you feel really good and you feel really connected to the other people that are in the club. But if you're not in the club, you feel really bad that you should. Oh my gosh, I better learn about this, or should I learn about it, or I'm just out of it, or. Depending on your personality, I definitely felt out of it in terms of the backstories of some of the commercials, and it's interesting to think how upsetting that is, or, whether it's upsetting to me or others, and also are those ads targeting the people who are not like me, who are not really interested in the details of the actual game of the Super Bowl, or are they appealing to the people who are watching the game and also feeling like they have to be part of the club with what's going on in the commercials.
Yeah, it's just hard. It's hard to be an audience now. All right, I think we need to take a break, so we'll have time for Somebody Somewhere. Why don't we do that? We'll come back with more of Rich Hollant and Irene Papoulis and Sam Hadelman.
Oh, so true. 'Cause I saw it on TV. I know it's true. Oh, so true. 'Cause I saw it on TV.
All right, so welcome back to The Nose with Sam Hadelman, Irene Papoulis, and Rich Hollant, who I think might be rebooting his computer right now, so I'll go to the other panelists. First, we're going to talk about Somebody Somewhere. It's a new series on HBO Max. It has Duplass brothers backing, which is always a good thing. It's set in Manhattan, Kansas, but the cast is very Manhattan, New York City. Bridget Everett, who's a legendary raunchy cabaret performer at places like Joe's Pub, plays a woman from Manhattan, Kansas, which is also what Bridget Everett actually is. She's from Manhattan, Kansas. She is, let us say, a woman who does not appear to have spent her life counting calories, and she is. It's hard to summarize the series, but she's kind of navigating a complex family dynamic, which includes a sister who is dead, another sister who's kind of constantly trolling her, a niece who kind of worships her, a kind of dead-end job at this test processing center in Manhattan, Kansas. I know I'm leaving things out right now. And then she discovers a kind of second life there in Manhattan, Kansas. One of her coworkers, a man named Joel, played by the amazing Jeff Hiller. Jeff, played by the amazing Joel Hiller. It's something like that. He invites her to this thing that's called Sunday Choir Night. It's at a church, but what it really is for the towns and the area's LGBT community to do kind of theatrical stuff and cabaret singing. And that's the best I can do. Irene, what am I leaving out?
What are you leaving out? Well, I mean, her psychological struggle was very interesting. Is a big part of it, and that's an interesting element. And I just have to say that I, like Sam, I was like, oh no, it's a feel-good comedy. I'm not really going to be that interested in it. But from the very beginning, the moment it started, I was so sucked in, and it's so good, so well done. And I think there's the fantasy, it is sort of like the story of the loser who gets together with a group of other losers, that it sort of has that feeling, but it's such a wonderfully charming way that it's really kind of very, really fun to watch, super fun to watch.
Yeah, Sam, I thought the series kind of hit its stride with the most recent episode that dropped. It begins with Jeff helping out with blessings of the animals at this church that they're all kind of involved in, and spirals into some of the other subplots there. And suddenly I thought the dramatic elements and the comic elements of the series were really beginning to kind of tie together and gel for me. But I'm interested to know what your reaction was.
I bet you were very surprised to get an email from me about this like 2 weeks ago. I just randomly watched it. I saw an ad for it and I was like, oh, this looks kind of interesting. This is like a real trade secret, but I'm a sucker for middle of America sitcoms. Like King of the Hill is like my favorite show. I actually like the middle. But what I like about this show is it's not apolitical like other shows are. I'm not saying it has like a political preference, but it definitely leans into some really serious topics. Hell, there's fentanyl, dealers, alcoholism, death. And I think that's the whole game of being a dramedy, right? It's being able to play in both fields. If it's too funny but not serious enough, it's just kind of like a lackadaisical comedy. If it's too dramatic and not funny enough, then you're just kind of depressed on a Saturday night by yourself. But I really liked the assembly of the cast. I thought that Jeff Hiller's hysterical, Mike Haggerty, Bridget Everett, who I didn't know was really raunchy outside of the show. I had no information about this at all. So when I saw what she did in her free time, I was like, oh my God, is this the same woman? But I also did love the last episode. I think the show is really fully hitting its stride.
And Rich, how about you? I got the sense as we were emailing around that this hadn't really blown you away anyway.
Well, actually, I didn't think that it was going to blow me away. And the interesting thing is that it just knocked me for a loop. what they're doing with grieving in this thing, which I think so many of the characters are still so deeply rooted in grieving. And how they manipulate with how they use grieving as a vehicle to explore, how they connect with each other and how they connect with themselves is just stunning. And that's the piece that, to me, and again, it might be where I am right now, I gravitated to the modeling of grieving that's happening in this series, and how it's all okay. And I also noted that it created a sort of out of bodiness to Bridget Everett, and I would guess my gut in watching this was that she wasn't first and foremost an actor. Right? I assume that she came from some other performance kind of background. And then I heard that she was actually a stand-up comic, and that made a lot of sense to me. But there's something about her performance that's all over the place. It's jerky, it's overdrawn. It sits as a layer on top of the other characters who all act as one body in this one town, moving in a kind of similar way. And she comes and is this sort of disruptive force, just energetically in this space, and never really quite fits in. I think that the thought that I had about it is that she almost feels photoshopped into these scenes, and that's, to me, what a glorious expression of what grieving is. And I think it captured a thing that the Crying article missed, right? That there's a piece about that's universal about it, and so deeply individual and personal about the experience of grieving, that this thing nailed. And I'm enjoying watching every bit of it.
Yeah, so I do want to say that I did a little research into everybody. First of all, I should say I'm still struggling with the character. Okay, it's Jeff Hiller as Joel. Okay, so I saw Jeff Hiller years ago in a show called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson. It was at the Public, getting ready to move up to Broadway. He was part of this really sort of multi-role ensemble. But I mean, you just couldn't stop looking at him, and he was hilarious. But he was mugging, and he was camping it up an awful lot. One of the other characters in the series is a guy who performs, or a person who performs, I should say, as once again in kind of cabaret settings in the East Village and other venues around New York, as Murray Hill, who's a drag king. They, I think is the right way to say it, they play a character named Dr. Fred Rococo, and Bridget Everett herself is kind of famous for performing in these kind of skimpy outfits, although she's a very, very large woman, and for doing things that I can't even necessarily describe on public radio with male members of her audience. And all of them are really just dialing themselves way down. And Hiller, I think in particular, has found a real subtlety and an emotional way of kind of anchoring this performance. But Irene, one thing that this does is, you're not seeing, and you made this point as we were kind of chatting and getting ready for this, we're not seeing kind of typical beautiful people in a dramedy or sitcom. We're seeing kind of people who look like middle America.
Absolutely. I mean, her father is really another good example of that. Her father in the show, and all of the casting is really interesting. they're all very believable as being Midwesterners. It made me remember when Roseanne first came out, and like that was the first time, at least to me, that two quite heavy people were the stars of a show, of a sitcom. And it was great to see that reality on the screen. But I'm also thinking too that the show is really also about friendship. I mean, it's grieving, and it's grieving with other people, or feeling the connection with other people in your own grieving, and it's grieving for people, and it's also grieving for a lost, like the self that one could be or wishes to be, but isn't, and all that. But in the company of friends. And I think those characters are so, it's such, in a way, it's just a wonderful fantasy of being lonely in the way that she's lonely, and then meeting, which is what always happens in sitcoms, getting together with these people that are sympathetic in a very extremely touching way to her and to her experience, and also honesty. You know, and the reason they are sympathetic is because they get to levels of honesty in terms of communication and the friendship that I also found really touching. You know, just really saying what's going on. And Joel, the Joel character, I mean, doesn't everyone wish he was your best friend? You know, he's just such a wonderfully cheerful spirit of a human being.
Although I feel like Joel is headed for some stormy waters here based on the most recent episode that drops. He's about to go through, I think, his own internal crisis anyway. But yeah, Sam, just to build on what Irene's saying, I do feel like, you know, part of the journey of every single human being, just about, is to figure out where is home? Where am I going to feel at home? You know, which group of people are going to welcome me and accept me for who I am and maybe help me grow into even something more than I have been. And I do think if somebody somewhere nails things, I think Rich is right that it nails grief, and Irene's right that it nails friendship. But I think it also really nails that whole thing, the search we have for what's going to be our milieu.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think I've ever been anyone who like has identified with one singular group. I mean, and I kind of like relate to it at some level. I mean, I grew up in like a nuclear family hotspot in Connecticut that our town logo is a farmer being pulled by an ox. So I get the vibes. And trying to like, I feel like as I've gotten older, I've gotten a deeper appreciation for wanting to like find a collective and group that you don't have to like work at being accepted. Like, I hated that feeling of like analyzing myself and being like, why doesn't everyone else want to look up to Allen Iverson when I was like in 6th grade? Like, and now like as an adult, like doing radio, loving music, you know, being really into movies and finding like small little collectives of people who just sit there and listen to my ranting as like, I don't know. I feel like that's what it's all about. Like at first you're like, why doesn't everybody accept me? And then you're like, hold on. I don't need them. I could just go find people who will just immediately get what I'm doing. Like, I don't know. That's what the show spoke to me about, at least.
You know, in a way, Rich, it kind of circles back to what you were saying about giving your own performance and crying during your own performance, because one of the ways that like half of the cast of this movie seems to be able to find home and a feeling of acceptance and a feeling of growth and self-expression and reconciliation with a lot of really troubling stuff is through performance. This thing that they call choir practice, or whatever the secret name for it is this place where they can go and not so much talk about who they are, but perform who they are.
Well, yeah. So the beauty of choir practice is everybody gets to be who they are. It's this idea. It's this thing that grew out of the Joel character has keys to the church, and he's able to put together this sort of ragtag team of folks who come and just have a stage in front of them and get to express who they are in its totality, right? And there's an element of that that's beautiful, but, you know, it's not handled in a pat way, you know, where everybody who gets up is immediately, you know, lauded. There was this one scene for me that was most uncomfortable, was when the Bridget Everett character got up and, you know, and found her readiness to just belt out, you know, I think it was a Janis Joplin song, right? Mm-hmm. And she got the audience and everybody who was watching her wanted so desperately to accept her, and it seemed like that was their, you know, first rule of Fight Club in this instance, right? But she was pushing it to a place of like real awkwardness, you know, and bringing people in with her and creating this weird tension. And, you know, watching how all of the performers realigned with this new level of acceptance of how this choir club was going to work, you know, how they all evolved to meet her where she was taking this thing was beautiful, you know. And to your points, Sam, should we all find that community that adjusts for us? There's a piece of that also that for me is a suspense of disbelief, right? I don't know that we find that kind of community, you know, the one that accepts us unilaterally and without rules and and without bumping into the no-fly zones within that community. I'm fascinated to see what happens when this community of folks gets into the place of tension around their openness.
All right, that's a very interesting way of staging that. That's a good preview of coming attractions. Have we actually played a clip? I don't think we played a clip here yet. So let's quickly do that. This is from season 1, episode 3. You are going to hear Bridget Everett as Sam and Jeff Hiller as Joel. Let's hear what they have to say to one another.
Just keep 3 cars between us, okay?
But there aren't any other cars.
All right, well then hang back. Joel.
Oh wait, I'm just gonna let this guy go.
Joel, no, go around or we're gonna lose him.
Well, no, I can't go around. What about oncoming traffic?
You just said that there were no other cars, Joel. Hit it.
No,
Go.
It's too risky.
It's not risky. You can't hesitate. Just pull out and go around. You can do it.
Don't hesitate.
Don't hesitate. Don't hesitate. Hit it.
Oh no. I'm sorry, I hesitated.
Joel.
I'm sorry.
Go, we're gonna lose him. Go.
Oh, God.
Don't hesitate. Just go. You did it! You did it!
Oh, that was scary and fun!
Oh no, where's Rick?
God, where is he?
So, Irene, we're going to have to wrap this up pretty quickly, but that's a scene, I believe, where they're tailing Sam's brother-in-law, who turns out to have multiple secrets. We don't want to say what any of them are, but she feels like he's keeping secrets. He is keeping secrets. And I guess that's maybe the last thing we haven't really talked about, which is, although we're kind of dancing around it a little bit, this is also, I think, a series about whether you tell the truth about yourself, where can you tell the truth about yourself, and what do you need to know about the other people around you who aren't necessarily being truthful.
How much are you paying attention? You know, the more you pay attention, the more you're going to see. But a lot of people don't pay attention at all, or they don't want to see. And I don't know. I was just thinking. I just want to pick up on what Rich said about the. It's not so easy to form a group like that or to have a group like that. And I think it is. That's why I think it's a fantasy that you're going to have people that are going to see your secrets, call you on them. You can see theirs, etc. Yeah. And it's I'm also thinking that it's kind of an anti-pandemic show because they get to go out. There's nobody wearing a mask. They don't have to worry about it. It's not the world of the pandemic at all. And that's another fantasy.
All right. Well, we should wrap it up right there just so we'll have time to make some recommendations at the end. The show is Somebody Somewhere on HBO Max. New episodes drop on Sunday nights. We all encourage you to watch.
Don't give up. We don't need much of anything. Don't give up. 'Cause somewhere there's a place where we belong. Rest your head. You worry too much. It's gonna be alright.
And Kat Pastor's the technical producer of this show, making everything happen the way it's supposed to. And Lily Tyson is doing the unusual job of producing The Nose, which is almost invariably produced by Jonathan McPants. Getting some R&R this week, senior producer Lily Tyson taking over. With me today on the panel, Sam Hadelman, Rich Hollant, Irene Papoulis. We're going to make some recommendations right now. Irene, why don't you get us started?
Okay. So first I want to recommend Sumo Citrus, which is a fruit I'd never had before. And it looks like a giant tangelo with a lot of bumps in it. And it's so delicious and they're great. Then 2 movies. One I saw Parallel Mothers, and I actually saw it in a theater, which, they had Real Artways. They had vaccine. You had to show your vaccine card. You had everybody wore a mask. There was hardly anyone in there. Felt very safe. And it's a very interesting, serious movie by Almodovar with Penelope Cruz. And it's a conversation starter in an interesting way. It's about sort of like the Franco, the legacy of World War II and the historical memory, but tied in with a whole other story. And it's kind of interesting. I also saw Kimmy on HBO, which is really a pandemic movie with Zoe Kravitz, who just didn't fascinating acting job of somebody in the pandemic staying home and what it's like and what she was like. And so I recommend that too.
Yeah, it's a Soderbergh movie. We'll probably get to it when McPants gets back. It feels like something we'll do on the nose. Rich Holland, how about you?
Okay, so I've got two recommendations, both movies. The first one is one of my top 5 movies, and I talked about it a bit today, called Dancer in the Dark. It features Bjork, Catherine Deneuve, David Morse, Joel Grey. It's a Lawrence von Trier movie, and you'll cry, I promise. And the other one that I want to recommend, I saw it yesterday, and it is now in my top 5 movies, which is a heck of a thing to get into. It is, and if you haven't seen it yet, just get it in before it wins everything next month in the Oscars, I predict. The Power of the Dog. Jane Campion. What a movie, what a performance, what a series of phenomenal performances, what an incredibly small story rendered bigger than life, bigger than mountains. Stunning, smart, economically made. I don't know if it was economically budgeted, but beautiful. Go see it.
Yes, and you can even track down a recent episode of The Nose where we talked about The Power of the Dog. And Sam Hadelman, how about you?
I'm going to recommend 2 of the best shows on TV. These are stuff that I sent you in that roundup email I sent you like 2 weeks ago. Yellow Jackets is probably the best show on television. It's on Showtime. It's like Degrassi meets Lord of the Flies. It's about this 1996 girls soccer team that crashes in the Canadian forest on a plane, and they have to like live out in the woods and basically develop some like pseudo cannibalist society. It's unreal. I need someone to watch it. So if you do watch it, please reach out because nobody will talk to me about it. And then the other one is the next big show of our time, Abbott Elementary. It's the show that takes place in a public school. Phenomenal cast. It's going to be the show that rules the next 5 to probably 7 years on television. So yeah, Yellow Jackets and Abbott Elementary.
Okay. So I should tell you that Yellow Jackets was also the subject of a fairly recent episode of The Nose, so you at least have that to turn to. Yellow Jackets also stars 3 kind of 90s stars, Melanie Linsky, Christina Ricci, and Juliette Lewis as the kind of older selves of the soccer players. It also stars Sophie Thatcher, who as a younger Juliette Lewis. She's also in the Book of Boba Fett, which we featured on a recent Nose. I just want to say I've gotten to the end of this. I'm not a Star Wars completist, but I really thought this was good. I didn't understand things because I haven't seen all of The Mandalorian. It didn't seem to matter. And it's one of these series where the final episode of this first season really paid off. A lot of times they don't. But there was kind of a massive kind of Western style payoff to all this. I'm also going to recommend the podcast, The Trojan Horse Affair. It hardly needs my help. It's made essentially by the same team that made Serial, plus 2 new journalists who are doing the reporting on this strange letter that disrupted the educational process, the Muslim community, and the social fabric of Birmingham, England, and kind of England at large, too, to a certain degree, sowing xenophobia and paranoia and racism wherever it went. The 2 journalists who report this, one's an American, the other one's a British Pakistani Muslim. It kind of turns into a buddy movie between the 2 of them, too. They have tremendous rapport and kind of a lot of fun getting to know one another while they're reporting this really vexing and outrageous set of circumstances about which very few people are being truthful. So it's riveting. It's good in all the ways that that Serial team led by Ira Glass and Sarah Koenig can make things good. So the Trojan Horse Affair, we may do that on a future Nose episode too. Meanwhile, thanks very much to Rich Holland, Sam Hadelman, Irene Papoulis. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.
Woodbury, hitting on New Britain, Vernon, I already said that one, Avon, Farmington, yeah.